Good morning, everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about love your enemies. You know, there are people in the world today who belong to your very same religious group. I'm not saying that person belongs to your particular religious organization, but I'm referring to that one tree trunk called Christianity and its many branches. But you have persons who proclaim Christianity and they can care 1 cent about you. Less than 1 cent about you. In fact, nothing about you. If you got sick, if you were visited upon by some calamity such as a natural disaster or a human disaster, if you died, those persons don't care. But they'll attend church every Sunday or whenever they have their church services. Those persons might not care because you don't see eye to eye, because you belong to another denomination, or because you believe that Jesus is not God and they believe that Jesus is God. Or in their eyes, you're considered a false worshiper, an unbeliever, a heretic, a heathen, a sinner. It could be over your skin color, your nationality, your ethnicity. There are persons in the world who claim that they're Christians who could care 2 cents about you. If you disappeared from the surface of the ground tomorrow or today, they could care less. Back in 2003, there was an earthquake in Iran and 29,000 people lost their lives. Now, that event was not covered largely in the U.S. News media, but 29,000 people lost their lives. Men, women, and children. Some 23,000 were injured. Now, Iran is largely a Muslim nation, but it shouldn't matter to us. Those are people, they're human beings. Whether they're Christians or Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists or whatever, it should not matter. These are people. We're all created by one God. We all have a creator. But yet, because of the divisiveness of religion, people could care less. I've heard people say, well, that's good for them. But wait a minute, you're a Christian, you go to church. I find that very odd. Where's the love? Jesus didn't teach love Christians. Of course, he didn't tell us to be called that. But he didn't teach just love those who believe as you do or look like you do or who believe as you do. He says, love your neighbors. What about your neighbors over there? What do you know about them? Suppose they're Hindi. Suppose they're Muslims and you're a Christian. You are obligated as a follower of Christ to love your neighbor. And you're also obligated to love your enemies. That is, those who do not love you even. You know, one of the hardest things for any person, I will think, to do is to give up your life for someone who hates you. And Jesus did that. One of the greatest acts of love, in my opinion, is that Jesus gave up his precious life for those who did not like him, who did not love him. They would persecute him and even put him to death. A day ago in Hamburg, Germany, a lone gunman walked into a Kingdom Hall and gunned down 7 Jehovah's Witnesses, including an unborn baby, while they're in there engaged in their service. It doesn't matter if a person is a Jehovah's Witness, a Mormon, a Seventh-day Adventist, a Catholic, a Protestant. These are people. Because you don't like them personally, should not be cause for you to say, well, that's good for them, or you show no love or concern. Your love is gone. It's nothing there. You're cold. Incidentally, my thoughts and prayers go out to those families there in Hamburg, Germany, who lost loved ones. I will say the same thing about anyone, no matter what religion or what denomination that they belong to, because these are people. Jesus did that. Jesus didn't make a separation between people because of their skin color or they believed a certain way, whether they were Jews or Gentiles. He died for everyone. He showed concern for everyone. His teaching to love your enemies. Think about that. Did he not do that? Did he not cry out to the Father on the day that he died or before he died, his last few moments in life? He cried out to the Father and asked the Father to forgive them. Who are the them there? Those are the persons who put him up there on that staru, that torture stake, stuck a sword in his side, thrust a crown of thorns on his head, but he asked the Father to forgive them, for they know not what they do. It has nothing to do with one's religion. But yet there is an us versus them mentality that is especially heavy within the camp of Christianity. It's us, we're righteous and we're the good guys and those are the bad guys. We're the believers and they're the unbelievers. If you flip that switch, the same thing can apply to you. While you think that you are the believer, you might not be the believer. You might be the unbeliever, and the person that you're pointing a finger at and you're calling the unbeliever may be the believer. You see, it's Christ who identifies who his sheep are. I've mentioned this before. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, Jesus said there that many will call him Lord, Lord. That is, they will proclaim a belief in him. Yet Jesus will say to them, I never knew you. Get away from me, you evildoers. And when we show concern for others, no matter who they are, we add something to ourselves. We add treasures to ourselves. It builds character in us. Showing concern for others, whether they're friend or foe, adds value to our lives. It makes us better persons. It makes us more godly persons. It makes us Christ-like. But it seems in this world it's easier to point fingers. It's easier to show hate. It's easier to show no concern for others because they don't believe as you do. They don't look like you do. They don't think as you do. They don't agree with you. They question you or they challenge you. How foolish is that, people? At Matthew chapter 5, I love reading that particular chapter because Jesus has a whole lot there, but I'm going to pick out a small snippet of something that he said. And please notice how he phrased this. This is at Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 43, and I'll take it down to verse 48. Jesus says there, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And that's what's written at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. So Jesus is saying here, you've heard that it was said back in the day, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That's where a lot of persons today who claim that they follow Christ are right now. That's their mentality, that they love their neighbors. They love persons who attend the same church group that they attend or believe as they do, but they hate their enemies. But at verse 44, Jesus is saying, but I tell you, that's what was written back then, that's what was said back then, but now I'm telling you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? And Jesus concludes, he says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Not that we are perfect, but we are to do our utmost to emulate our Creator and Father in heaven, and also our head and Lord and Master, Christ himself. Because he showed compassion. He showed love for persons who are not his followers. What's wrong with a lot of persons out there today who stand on the pulpit, who get out here on a YouTube space, and they stage themselves up there as teachers and preachers, and they preach and teach unlike Christ. They preach a foreign message. This is what I'm hearing is like a foreign language. Where does this come from? It doesn't come from Christ. Jesus says that Matthew chapter 24, verse 12, he says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Now, for those of you out there who say that you're Christians, this applies to you too. You should be taking this right here, taking this samurai sword, this finger, and pointing it at other people and saying, well, it's talking about those persons over there. It's talking about you too. It's talking about everyone. We have seen the historical record of Christianity in Earth's history. Its involvement in all of the major conflicts in the world, all the world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, even the conflicts of today, the transatlantic slave trade, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the Salem witch hunts, and I can go on and on and on. It's referring to you too. And you would think that you, that is Christians, would lead the way in showing love for enemies. But you don't do that. Many of you don't even like those who proclaim that they too are Christians. You fight and you contend with them too. Where does this come from? It doesn't come from Christ. As 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, the Apostle Paul writes, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love." Let me repeat that one. Without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Verse 5, having a form of godliness. You get that? Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. See, that's a hypocrite right there. Persons claiming to be godly, but they don't listen to Jesus Christ. They don't follow his example. Have nothing to do with such people. We cannot mock God. We can't put on airs pretending that we believe in God and that we follow Christ and that we love God and that we love Christ, yet we don't listen to God. We don't obey his command at Luke chapter 9, verse 35, which commands us to listen to his son, and we do not do what Jesus says. Yet we use his name. We talk about him. Do not mock God. Don't play with this. You'll make matters worse for yourself. Don't say that you love God, who you have not seen, but hate your brother, who you have seen. So don't just show love and concern for those that you know, for those who belong to the very same religious group that you belong to, or who believe as you do. You show love and concern for all. Why? Because they're all creations of God. We all share the same Father. Whether one believes in him or not, he is our creator, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. This is R. Jerome Harris. Thank you for listening.